Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I just want to add some commentary to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Professor G. I'm a law professor and historian, and my area of scholarly research is on the slave laws and slave codes that sustained and maintained the antebellum slaveocracy. And recently, about a week or so ago, President Trump commented on True Social or Tweet or X, whatever it is, pretty much expressing his anger that the Smithsonian is displaying slavery in the way that it should be displayed, in a horrible way. So in effect, he's angry that the Smithsonian is teaching American history. And because of that tweet or that post or that truth, whatever they call it now, I made a video series, which right now is at 4 parts as I'm making this video on August 28th. And I intend to make more that show you using the judicial opinions and decisions of antebellum courts in the slaveholding states of how horrible slavery actually was from the mouths of the people who created the system that was based on white supremacy and was based on the idea that Africans and people of African descent, their natural condition and the best place for them was in a system of slavery to Caucasians, to white people. And the comments that I've gotten on some of these videos are very telling and very disturbing, because I want to ask the question, this is the kind of the commentary today, how is the study of slavery in American history, how has it become so political? And I challenge anyone to go back and watch any of my videos where I have made any statement of what political affiliation I belong to, what party I belong to, my political leanings. Now, I haven't, and I don't. And being critical of President Trump doesn't in any way divulge what political leanings or political party I belong to. There are many people on the right now who are very upset with Trump for the Epstein files. Just because they criticize something Trump has done or hasn't done yet doesn't make them less of a right-leaning individual. For me, I began my career in academics as a middle school and a high school teacher. I then went to law school and became a law professor. But I've always taken the position that anything that I do, for the most part when it comes to educating in the public realm, I've kept my political leanings close to my chest because, especially with younger students and kids, I never wanted my political leanings to influence their decisions, how they developed when it came to them finding their own route in the political world. As a history teacher, I gave them history. Of course, there's going to be interpretations of it, but I did my best to give both sides of every issue. And we're talking about middle school and, high school, so it's not that in-depth. It's not like teaching, at the, undergraduate or graduate level. And then even in law school, right, I don't teach slave laws and slave codes in law school. Right now, this semester, I'm teaching advanced constitutional law. So that, again, I keep my political leanings close to the chest because I'm going to give students the law, the judicial opinions, and let them do analysis on it. But the comments accusing me of being a leftist, woke, all that, I'll put some of the comments up here. It's very disturbing to me, not because, I'm not on the left or I'm not this or not that. None of that matters. The point is, or my fear is that if someone comes out and says slavery was based on white supremacy or slavery was horrible, and here are the words of the judges that expose that, and the first response is, you're a leftist, you're a wokey, all this other sort of stuff, we've politicized the study of history so much that it's terrifying that this is what it's become. I believe you can absolutely be a conservative Republican and still look back and agree that history, the system of antebellum slavery was based on white supremacy, and that white supremacy, those ideas, the pseudoscience that fueled it, the laws that established and maintained it, while slavery ended with the 13th Amendment, all of that, those generations that had been taught and learned for years, that racism didn't end. And we clearly see that with the evolution through the Reconstruction era, through the Jim Crow era, and even up to today. I never made the comment that any white person today is responsible for slavery. And I don't think anyone who studies the antebellum slavery believes that any white person today is responsible for slavery. But that's what you get accused of if you point back and say white people in the antebellum period, the early republic, so early republic through the antebellum period, created a system of African slavery based on white supremacy, and that is just historical truth. You do a disservice to our country when you try and pretend that this is not the way that it was. Someone made a comment, the Smithsonian Museum's teaching you shouldn't leave feeling bad from a museum. Well, if I go to the Holocaust Museum, or if I go to Auschwitz today, do I leave those museums feeling jovial and jumping up and down and feeling good about the redemption of the Jewish people and where they are today? No, I leave with a visceral gut reaction of how horrible the Holocaust actually was. Slavery, the system of African slavery in the United States, is on the same level of horror as something like the Holocaust. So when you go to the Smithsonian, when you go to an American history museum, when you go to, for example, the Whitney Plantation here in Louisiana, which is one of the only plantations that has been turned into a museum showing the horrors of slavery, as opposed to being a bed and breakfast or a place where people can get married and take pictures in front of antebellum homes, when you go to these places, you should feel disturbed by it. Because that's the point of learning history, is so we don't do these things again, and so we understand why we are where we are today. Not to blame people today, but to understand why we have the dynamics that we have today in politics, in law, in race relations, because from the beginning of the founding of our nation till the 13th Amendment, we had, and I've said this in many videos, the Southern culture, the slave society, was and became a nation, the Confederate States of America, founded on the idea of white supremacy and the premise that Africans should always be enslaved to whites, and that was their best condition. That was where they belonged naturally. So to gloss over that is to do a disservice to our history. It's to do a disservice to people, the same commenter who brought up Martin Luther King. Yes, you lead in the study of American history from the system of African slavery through the Jim Crow era to the Civil Rights Movement to understand why these great American figures did what they did. There's nothing political about showing how horrible American slavery was, the system of African slavery. Someone commented, Hillary lost, get over it. And I responded, cool. In 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson. Again, my political leanings, my political beliefs have no bearing on the horrors of antebellum slavery. So it's not a political thing. What's political is looking back on it and trying to say that it wasn't as bad as it actually was, trying to deflect from the fact that it wasn't based on white supremacy, trying to deflect and take away from how significant it was in our nation's founding, in the Civil War, in the foundation of the Confederacy, and in the problems that we continue to experience today because of race relations in a country that had codified white supremacy in it, and that eventually would become a breakaway country that existed for the sole purpose of perpetuating the system of African slavery. So there's nothing political about acknowledging the horrors of the antebellum slaveocracy. What's political is pretending that it didn't exist and try and take that out of museums. It shouldn't make you feel good. Not all history is going to make you feel good. This concept of, American exceptionalism, that is not for this channel to argue here or there, but America was very exceptional in its ability to create a white supremacist-based system of African slavery during the early Republican antebellum periods. That's not a good thing. That doesn't take away from what America can be or could be or has been, or all of the parts of our history and the good parts of all of it, but you do a disservice to the good parts of history when you ignore the horrible parts of history. And one horrible part of American history is the system of African slavery. So really just this commentary on the idea of how terrifying it is to see that if you dare say slavery was bad, it was worse than you think, it was based on white supremacy, you get these political comments back. And I think that's why we are in the state that we are today, because it's become a political issue to study history for what it actually is. And people are trying to put limits on what can be said about, historical events, especially things like slavery. I'm not going to talk about it at length here, but go watch my video that I talked about Candace Owens and PragerU. You'll see time and time again in the comment section of my videos, people saying, there was slavery everywhere else. Of course there was. White people were enslaved by Arabs, by the Barbary pirates, by all of this. But I've made the point that is world history and the history of slavery, the history of slavery for all time. If you want to study that, that's fine. I'm talking about American history. And the fact that whites were enslaved, the fact that Barbary pirates enslaved whites, or the fact that blacks enslaved other blacks and then sold them to white slave traders who brought them here to the United States, which I talk about in that video, go watch. None of that takes away from the horrors of the system of African slavery in the United States based on white supremacy. None of that does. Saying, well, there was slavery somewhere else, okay, that should be studied. That was abhorrent. Slavery still exists today. It should be combated. We should do everything possible to stop it. But none of that takes away the responsibility of whites during the antebellum system, during the foundation of the United States, until the 13th Amendment, for creating a system of white supremacy that enslaved Africans and people of African descent. Slavery anywhere else doesn't take away from that, no matter what you say. And it doesn't take away from the fact that the lasting impacts of slavery, the systemic racism that was built into the system, lasted long past the ratification of the 13th Amendment. So, again, my political leanings, what I believe politically here or there, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is history. It is what it is. From the words, from the mouths of the judges who wrote the judicial opinions, the horrors of slavery are apparent, and I will continue to post that on this channel and continue to do my academic studies and research into this topic. I'm fascinated by it. It is disturbing to me on levels that I can't articulate, and that's why I believe it is so important that we continue to study not just slavery from the accounts of the enslaved and from the history books that are already before us, but we actually look, and that's what this channel does, at the law that maintained and sustained the antebellum slaveocracy. So as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next one.